All right, good evening. Thanks to those of you who are taking the time to join and those of you who will be watching. I appreciate it. Welcome to our workshop on global conflict and cooperation. I'll go ahead and introduce what this workshop is about and then share with you our schedule for the fall semester and then the workshops that we held during the summer, since this is a continuation of a summer workshop. So this workshop on global conflict and cooperation is focused on defining, exploring, and discussing global conflict and cooperation from the point of view of different international institutions, country governments, and international non-governmental organizations. So I appreciate you taking the time to want to learn more about what's going on in the world. Now, this is our schedule for fall of 2021. Note here that we meet every Thursday from 8 to 8:30. And our topic this week will be Afghanistan, and next week it will be the country of Haiti. And then for subsequent weeks, we'll go ahead and figure that out as we can. And it looks like my phone's trying to talk to me. All right, on to our going back in time a bit from summer. This was our schedule. So if you want to get a little bit more about the overview, about the concepts of conflict and cooperation and how we operationalize them, you're more than welcome to watch the recordings from our past workshops so you can get up to speed. All right, so let's jump right into week one, Afghanistan. Our learning objectives with this workshop are the following. First is you should be able to describe the conflict occurring in Afghanistan. Secondly is to describe an example of cooperation with Afghanistan or in Afghanistan or on Afghanistan. And then lastly, explain the US government's position on this issue. Now, before we begin, I want to give some context to Afghanistan. Obviously, it's a country located in central South Asia. And I like to point folks to the CIA World Factbook, which is a resource that has been around for at least a decade and a half since I first came across it, and probably much longer. What's nice about this website is that it gives you a clear sense of every country. You can see different maps, photos, country flags, etc. But what's really helpful is this introduction, geography, and different topics about the country. It really gives you a sense of that country from a geopolitical intelligence standpoint. Now, obviously, it's not going to demonstrate the culture, the people, the food, the religion, like the sense of actually being there. But I think it's helpful to just get a sense of it in general. If you don't have experience with the particular country, or you don't have family, or you don't have friends, you at least get a topical level overview. So go ahead and encourage you to check this out when you get a chance. And the link is in the presentation. Now, first I'd like to just focus on the conflict. And there's an article in the Washington Post early this week, sometime last week, titled "Taliban Declare Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Here's what it looked like last time." And here on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of a map of Afghanistan from July 9th of this year to August 15th of this year. And the question this graph asks is how much of the country is in Taliban hands? And what you'll see here is that the yellow colored region is contested, which counts for about 167 of the 300 and almost 400 provinces or subunits. You had 141 of those subunits in government control, and then you had 90 of those subunits in Taliban control. Now, fast forward about 45 days later, and we'll see here that there's 41 contested provinces, down from 167. We'll see that there's 12 in government control, and this obviously has changed in the past 4 days, where there's nothing in government control anymore. And then the remaining 345 plus provinces, subunits are now in the hands of the Taliban. So let's go ahead and open up this article, and we'll listen in a bit for what's going on there.
As Taliban fighters took Kabul on Sunday evening, roaming through the halls of the abandoned presidential palace, the group issued a statement. It would soon revive Afghanistan's former name. The country that was built in the wake of the 2001 U.S. invasion at a cost of over $2 trillion would revert to the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. That's the name the country bore between 1996 and 2001, the period that now serves as the only point of reference for what Afghans and the international community can expect from the new government in Kabul. How will thousands of insurgents, who spent the last 2 decades fighting a guerrilla war, administer the state? The last time the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, the regime concentrated power within a tight circle of former rebels who had helped to oust the Soviets in the 1980s. That group had emerged from the country's civil war of the 1990s, promising a government guided by a strict interpretation of Sharia law. Its execution of that vision led to a profoundly violent, repressive and unstable nation that welcomed transnational terrorists and became a global pariah. The first emirate was launched in 1996, shortly after the Taliban arrived in Kabul. In late September of that year, fighters tortured and killed former President Najibullah and then hanged his body from a traffic post. Within a month, the Taliban dispatched squads of morality police from an agency known as the Promotion of Virtue and Elimination of Vice.
And so the article goes on to describe the history of the Taliban and giving a sense of the terror that it imposed on its people during the time it was in power in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then obviously we had a 20-year period of, I'll say relative calm, but obviously conflict because the United States was there trying to suppress any terrorist elements and trying to develop a central government that would be able to hold the line on the Taliban's presence and existence. Obviously, that didn't happen, but you get a sense of it here that this is part of the conflict, right? There's a historical nature to it, infused with culture, religion, and different views of it from different political actors. Now, when it comes to the American perspective, this short clip describes what U.S. presidents have said about Afghanistan over the past 20 years. So let's go ahead and take a look at and listen in on this clip that kind of compiles these messages that we've heard. So for myself, I remember hearing each of these messages because I was just finishing high school, going into college when the Afghanistan conflict broke out, obviously after 9/11. And then I've seen subsequent presidents give these debates, conversations, and even had a chance to be a part of it when I worked in Congress and writing to my member about, what we should do in Afghanistan. So let's go ahead and listen in on this. Now, let me raise the volume just a bit. Okay.
Given the nature and reach of our enemies, we will win this conflict by the patient accumulation of successes, by meeting a series of challenges with determination and will and purpose. Today we focus on Afghanistan, but the battle is broader. We will stay until the mission is done. We know that true peace will only be achieved when we give the Afghan people the means to achieve their own aspirations. Peace will be achieved by helping Afghanistan develop its own stable government. Our alliance must maintain its resolve and finish the fight in NATO. As President Sarkozy put it in London last week, we cannot afford to lose Afghanistan. Whatever the cost, however difficult the victory, we cannot afford it. We must win. I agree completely.
And even as there will be dark days ahead in Afghanistan, the light of a secure peace can be seen in the distance. These long wars will come to a responsible end. Others will ask, why don't we leave immediately? That answer is also clear. We must give Afghanistan the opportunity to stabilize. Otherwise, our gains could be lost, and al-Qaeda could establish itself once more. And as Commander-in-Chief, I refuse to let that happen. 2014, therefore, is a pivotal year. Together with our allies and the Afghan government, we have agreed that this is the year we will conclude our combat mission in Afghanistan. I think Americans have learned that it's harder to end wars than it is to begin them. Yet this is how wars end in the 21st century. Not through signing ceremonies, but through decisive blows against our adversaries, transitions to elected governments, security forces who are trained to take the lead, and ultimately full responsibility.
Our troops will fight to win. We will fight to win.
If I wanted to win that war, Afghanistan would be wiped off the face of the earth. It would be gone. It would be over literally in 10 days. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to go that route. We're getting out. We want to get out. We had good meetings with the Taliban. And we are going to be leaving, and we're going to be bringing our soldiers back home. We've been there for almost 20 years. It's a long time. We've done a great job in terms of getting rid of terrorists. Now it's up to other countries to get rid of those terrorists.
I'm now the 4th United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face. but I do not regret my decision to end America's warfighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan.
So this week has been seminal in the history of the United States' involvement in Afghanistan with its withdrawal. And obviously now what we're watching and seeing and reading in the news is the rush to exit for many Afghan people, especially those who've worked with, cooperated with the U.S. government and the U.S. military over the 20 years. And just as a profound sense of loss, fear, and hopelessness among many in that country and of their family members here back in the United States and in other parts of the world. And so we see that this conflict has raged on, and you see the language that's been used by different presidents. And now we're here today. So we know that Afghanistan is in turmoil, and we don't know what's next because we aren't there. We're not experiencing, we're not living it. If you're hearing about it from family and friends, then it's probably very difficult, to say the least. Now, in light of this conflict that's been ongoing for almost 2 decades now, there's this notion that cooperation has to exist in order to move forward. And so what I'd like to do is share the United Nations Security Council meeting that was held right after the fall of Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan, and the sense of the international community's role in this next effort. So what we'll do is we'll listen to the first 5 minutes of the UN Security Council. And just to give a brief overlay, you'll hear from the president introducing or welcoming the representative of Afghanistan to sit at the Security Council. And then the Secretary General of the United Nations, which is like the CEO, the administrative head of the United Nations, will give about 4 or 5 minutes worth of remarks about what needs to happen going forward. And just as a sidebar, the UN Security Council is the 15-member body that consists of 5 permanent members of the United States, France, United Kingdom, Russia, and China, and then 10 rotating members. And it serves as the body that will debate, discuss, deliberate, and then either support or not support resolutions on a range of security matters, including, in this case, the collapse of a central government and the rise of a potentially and a likely threat, as historically described. So let's go ahead and listen in.
The 8,834th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Afghanistan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I would like to warmly welcome His Excellency the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and would like to give him the floor. Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Excellencies, the world is following events in Afghanistan with a heavy heart and deep disquiet about what lies ahead. All of us have seen the images in real time: chaos, unrest, uncertainty, and fear. Much lies in the balance: the progress, the hope, the dreams of a generation of young Afghan women and girls, boys and men. At this grave hour, I urge all parties, especially the Taliban, to exercise utmost restraint to protect lives and to ensure that humanitarian needs can be met. Conflict has forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. The capital city has seen a huge influx of internally displaced persons from provinces around the country where they felt insecure or fled during fighting. I remind all parties of their obligation to protect civilians. And I call on all parties to provide humanitarians with unimpeded access to deliver timely and life-saving services and aid. And I also urge all countries to be willing to receive Afghan refugees and refrain from any deportations. Mr. President, now is the time to stand as one. The international community must be united and utilize all available instruments to ensure the following. First, we must speak with one voice to uphold human rights in Afghanistan. I call upon the Taliban and all parties to respect and protect international humanitarian law and the rights and freedoms of all persons. We are receiving chilling reports of severe restrictions on human rights throughout the country. And I am particularly concerned by accounts of mounting human rights violations against the women and girls of Afghanistan who fear a return to the darkest days. It is essential that the hard-won rights of Afghan women and girls are protected. They are looking to the international community for support, the same international community that assured them that opportunities would be expanded, education would be guaranteed, freedoms would be spread, and rights would be secured. Second, the international community must unite to make sure that Afghanistan is never again used as a platform or safe haven for terrorist organizations. I appeal to the Security Council and the international community as a whole to stand together, to work together and act together, and use all tools at its disposal to suppress the global terrorist threat in Afghanistan and to guarantee that basic human rights will be respected. Regardless of who holds power, these two fundamental principles, in which our world has such a deep and abiding interest, must be upheld. Mr. President, the United Nations is committed to supporting Afghans. We continue to have staff and offices in areas that have come under Taliban control. I am relieved to report that, in large measure, our personnel and premises have been respected. We urge the Taliban to continue to do so and to honor the integrity and inviolability of diplomatic envoys and premises. The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan affects 18 million people, fully half of the country's population. It is vital that basic services continue to be provided. In a statement issued yesterday, the Taliban said that they would work with the existing institutions. It is crucial that civil servant salaries continue to be paid, infrastructure is maintained, airports are reopened, and health and education services continue. The United Nations presence will adapt to the security situation. But above all, we will stay and deliver in support of the Afghan people in their hour of need. Looking ahead, I call for an immediate end to violence, for the rights of all Afghans to be respected, and for Afghanistan to comply with all international agreements to which it is a party. Mr. President, Afghans are a proud people with a rich cultural heritage. They have known generations of war and hardship. They deserve our full support. The following days will be pivotal. The world is watching. We cannot and must not abandon the people of Afghanistan. And I thank you.
And so that was the opening statement from the Secretary General on the situation in Afghanistan. And you heard him articulate two principles, right? Human rights and women's rights and security overall for the people of Afghanistan. And I want to point out the language that he's using. A lot of times people talk about countries and they kind of group both the government and the people together. But you saw this nuance in his language where he says the people of Afghanistan, the Afghanis, the people of Afghanistan. And note that there's a distinction in the international community when they're thinking about countries. They're thinking about the people who are there, and they think about the government that's in power, because it's not always synonymous that the people who are there are supportive of or supported by the central government or the government that exists. In many parts of the world, there's authoritarian and other repressive forms of government, and its people are the ones who suffer. So the international community and the United Nations, when you hear them speak, you hear the Secretary General and other officials from that organization, you'll hear them make that distinction between the people of a country and then the government of a country. So overall, what are some implications from what's happened in the past 7 days with respect to Afghanistan? Well, first is as the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, fell, there was this growing political backlash here in the United States towards the president and towards basically the military intelligence community, because people were like, how could this happen so quickly? Or why didn't we have it in a more orderly way? Or why weren't we able to evacuate not only our diplomatic personnel, but the people who've assisted it and all the other Americans and their allies in that country. Another implication is like asking the question, right? What did U.S. intelligence get wrong? For most folks who aren't paying attention to Afghanistan, don't know its history, we see this fall of a country and we're like shocked. And then when we see images of historical pastimes, like when the Russian government and military left Afghanistan after years of war, with the what they call the fall of Saigon, which was the U.S.'s station embassy in Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War, and other parts in histories in time where countries large and small withdrew from others in an ignominious way. And so the question will always come up, and a set of them are like, what are these policy implications? And you'll see here in this article, did the U.S. Intelligence get it wrong? And the answer would probably be yes, but, and then they go on to explain, and you'll see more and more articles talk about and ask these kinds of questions. Now, this last one is more political in nature. It's titled Afghan Refugee Debate Fractures the GOP, or the Republican Party. And what's interesting here is that there's this tension, right, when we have military conflict, that basically people get displaced. Either they displace within their country, what they call internally displaced people, or they leave their country, they migrate out and they become refugees. And obviously Central Asia and Afghanistan is kind of far away from the United States, but the connection that we have there militarily, now politically, socially, culturally, is beginning to say, well, we should draw house those folks, help those folks resettle who are refugees, who did assist the United States, who played some role in the U.S. efforts over the past 2 decades. And in the Republican political party, their challenge is, how do you reconcile this kind of the question on immigration, right? And so that article goes into detail explaining that fracture, where there's some GOP governors and others who say we should help resettle Afghanis in the United States, and others kind of saying, well, we're not sure, or even taking a more hostile approach, saying that that shouldn't be allowed for whatever reasons they have. So with that, I hope this workshop gives you a sense of Afghanistan now. This is a very pivotal and historic moment in our time, and we'll continue to look at this as the term goes by. Next week, we'll talk about Haiti, and if depending on how things develop in Afghanistan, we may return to Afghanistan going forward in the future workshop. So thanks for taking the time to listen in, and we'll go ahead and get to our discussion portion. Have a great night.